So I thought we only had 30 minutes and I was cramming a lot of stuff, but we've got a little bit more time. So I want us to think about a few core concepts today. But I also know that how many of you dress up for an event before you dress down, right? So I figured, I better put a jacket on, but I'm not, if you mind, I've never done this before. I've always wanted to do something new. So I'm just gonna undress for a minute, if you don't mind. I said I was going to wear my t-shirt, and I did. And I want to fit in a little bit with everybody so that we're all on the same page. All right. Okay, so an introduction. You got kind of a rough introduction, but I think one of the things you're going to find in your life is that your career emerges from your early story. And how many of you feel like you've got a story to tell, right? So let me just give you a little bit of a background. I was the hyperactive, chubby kid in grade school. I was the first ADHD kid in my class that was quietly escorted out of school where they said, go away. We don't need you anymore. And I kind of gave my thumb to and my finger to higher education and education in general for quite a long time. But when I was a teenager, I one day picked up a tennis racket and I started hitting tennis balls. And I realized when you hit a tennis ball, you actually have to focus your attention pretty clearly. And if you hit thousands and thousands of tennis balls, you focus, you scan, you focus, you scan. It's wax on, wax off. It's lots of push-ups. I learned how to focus really well. I got pretty good at tennis pretty quickly. And so I started thinking about, can I become a professional athlete? And so my journey kind of began in athletics and elite performance. And I got really, really excited about the idea of becoming a professional athlete and then working with elite performers on maximizing performance. But I'm gonna do a little exercise in a minute, but when I was in high school, I was really confident. I played #1 for my high school, and one day I had to play a kid from another high school that nobody knew who this high school was really. They didn't really have a good tennis team. And this kid comes out on the tennis court, unmatching rackets. I didn't think he played tennis much, so I was pretty confident. Anybody been overconfident when you've gone to perform, and then all of a sudden you find yourself getting a little nervous? So I'm out there, and this kid refuses to miss a ball. It wasn't pretty, but all of a sudden I find myself getting nervous. Like I'm losing points to this kid who doesn't really play that well. And so I started thinking, what are people going to think? What if I lose? People started to show up, crowds started to show up, the negative thinking started. What happens when the negative thinking started? Then what? The emotions start showing up, the nerves, the shakiness, looking out here, who's watching? My attention was everywhere else except, where should it have been? Hitting the tennis ball, right? So I found myself on the losing side of this match, and I was done. I told my coach, I don't want to play anymore. Here are my rackets, forget about it. And he said, well, you better play tomorrow because it's the second biggest tournament of the state, and you have to go. And he was the football coach too, so I could not go. But a miracle happened the next day. 3 cars were driving up. We had a 65-mile drive. I was in the middle, or I was in the back, and our #2 guy was in the middle. And all of a sudden, this red projectile hits our windshield, and it splattered everywhere, and we thought it was a big bug. But it was a strawberry. And somebody had said, wow, Carter's car, they're throwing our food. They're throwing their lunches at us. So we had a food fight, car to car, on I-35W for 40 miles. And bologna, strawberries, tomatoes, bread, you name it, we were just having the best time. I'm sure we'd have gotten arrested if they would have caught us. But we had the greatest laugh of our life on our way up. We pull up. There's 100 athletes standing out there, and the only two places to park were right in front of the tournament director and all the coaches. And the coach was so mad. But we didn't have time because we had to get right out on the court. So that day, I was playing #1 for my school, and I had to play 8 of the best tennis players in the state. And a miracle happened. I couldn't miss a tennis ball. Couldn't miss a tennis ball. In 6 hours, I played 8 matches, and I won 8-0, 8-0, 8-0, 8-1, 8-0, 8-2, 8-0, 8-0. And in 6 hours, I may have missed 15 shots. And it was absolutely stunning to me. And that moment changed the course of my existence. And I sat down with my coach and said, what in the world happened? How could 24 hours ago I was the worst I could be, and how is it today I can't miss? And so that's become my lifelong quest. So I went and said, wow, if I can hit a tennis ball, I can go from being a C student to a B student. And if I can be a B student, I can be an A student. And then if I can go to undergrad, I can be an A student there. And I just kept upping the ante. And for me, it started off as an undergrad in psychology, then off to Georgetown, where I started my graduate work at Georgetown, finished my master's degree in psychology to work with Olympic athletes up at Boston U, and then from there saw the broader picture. Like, we're all athletes, we're all performers, not just athletes, we're all performers in our job. So I went and did my MBA. And I said, I need to understand the nature of business. And I went through the MBA route, which was really, really hard. And then after the MBA route, went to a small consulting firm, decided it's time to do the PhD. So did the doctoral PhD, and I studied flow. Anybody hear of flow? We're going to talk about this for a minute. Being in the zone. I'm going to not only talk to you about it, but we're going to experience it here in a minute. And I really wanted to study how people got into flow. How do you get into that space? Can you engineer that space? And what does it tell us about our natural performance? And so I did my doctoral research and studied how do people get into that zone of high functioning and stay there. And then, so from there, it's gone on from working with Fortune 500s. My postdoctoral work, I went to Harvard Kennedy School. I went from being the C student in high school to an A student at the Kennedy School at Harvard. And it was all about just incremental, slow improvements. So the dumb kid in the 5th grade, I got smarter and smarter and better and better. And so I've spent my entire career working with, in fact, just yesterday, finishing up a strategy program for 7,000 of the world's leading surgeons, doing all the strategy work. Because what I'll talk about is that flow is something that you can find in yourself. It's something you find in relationship. Anybody had a date that went like 10 hours? You're in the zone. So there's relational flow, right? You've all experienced maybe some group or team flow dynamic. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So I wanted to start us off that way. The 3 things I wanted us to talk about is, number 1, that when you find your zone of high functioning, it starts to leave clues about what are the principles and practices of high performance in yourself, and then, spoiler alert, and other people as well. And over the years, 30 years of researching this and practicing this and working with elite athletes and CEOs and association directors and students, I spent 7 years building out an institute at a major university. It boils up to 3 secrets, and I'm going to tell you the 3 secrets. There's a lot underneath them, and I'm going to be sticking around through tomorrow, so I am happy to talk about this stuff in more depth, but we only have limited time today. And then I want to talk about, well, so what? So we perform well at what we do. You know, I want you all to be thinking about yourself as an athlete who does accounting, or an athlete who's an engineer, or an athlete who's a teacher. But what is it that is absolutely unique about you that showcases your signature greatness? And you probably, I don't know how much you think about that, but every single one of you in this room is distinguished, unique. There's nobody in the world like you. So why are you here? And what were you designed to do that nobody else in the world can do? So those are the 3 core messages, but I want to take you through hopefully some really interesting stories and ideas about how this stuff works. So let me ask you a question, and I apologize. I came here pretty ill, so I'm just managing that as I go. But I want you to, if you would, raise your hand if you think that you are smart and capable. All right, so you have the fundamental horsepower to read books, take tests in college. Now you're in the leadership roles. All right, raise your hand if you're good at what you do, whatever it is. Maybe you're a good student, maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're good at running groups. All right. I just did this with a group of 100 medical emergency room surgeons, and they're all smart, and they're all pretty good at what they do. But how many of you feel like you get into that zone a lot, or sometimes? You know, fewer hands go up, right? Now let me ask you this. Have any of you discovered what makes you unique yet? A few of you, right? That's really great. The earlier, and I want you to be thinking about that because everything in higher ed has changed. It's no longer about grades and test scores. That's only a grid. When I applied to Harvard, they had said, all we do now is check to see if you're smart enough to get in. Then you have to be the best in the world at something before you get to come. If two people are like you, one of you is coming, one of you is not. So discovering your signature brand early. What is your brand promise to an institution? What is your brand promise to an employer? That who side of the equation, we'll talk about that here in a minute. So I want you to be thinking about what's the brand that only you can deliver, that you are known for. Now, some of you may have seen this quote. I love this quote. If you are a biography lover, I will state this is the best autobiography that will ever be written. If you haven't read it, it's 750 stories of Mark Twain and his amazing experiences. But I love this quote, the two most important days of your life, the day you were born and then the day you discovered why. Anybody know what their why is yet? Oh, good, you don't quite know. I found out when I was 15. When I had that day, I discovered that that was going to be my why. And that's a very powerful day because everybody's taking classes and like, oh, I hate physics, I like history, and you start sorting and bagging like where the world needs you and wants you. But when you lock into that, this is who I'm going to be, and this is what I want to do, and this is my purpose, and this is why I'm on this planet, it's a very, very, very powerful moment. So I want to see what you already know about flow, because I bet you all kind of know it. About 85% of the population understands the concept tangibly. But I always find that the best way to do it is to see if you can tap into those moments. So if you would indulge me for a minute, best way to understand flow is to understand the opposite of flow, the really bad day. So if you would, close your eyes, and let's talk about anti-flow for a minute. Anti-flow is the day that I had when I played that one player. So I want you to think for a moment about a time where you were unfocused, where there was a lack of purpose, your energy may have been low, you were frustrated, maybe your self-talk was negative, your emotions weren't aligned with your thoughts, and your actions weren't aligned with your emotions or your thinking, and everything just kind of stunk. Bad day. Everything was going wrong. Tap into that for a moment, and while you think of one of those days or moments, maybe even a week or a month, how many of you have had some of those moments or days? Yeah? Okay, we've all had those, right? Where stuff isn't working. Some gear in the clock is busted. All right, let's do the opposite then. So what I like to do with audiences when I do a full day training on personal strategic planning is to start finding out, and I'll just ask a couple of you, where do your bad days show up, and what do you think contributes to the bad performance? Anybody? Yeah. All right, so lack of sleep, so low energy. Now that's a factor, right? Let's give 3 or 4 or 5 others, just real quick. What else? Yeah. All right, food. All right, so there's a physical foundation to doing good work, right? Yeah.
Like an external event, something else went wrong, got kickstarted.
Yep, all right, so other people, circumstances, locus of control, should I do anything about it? Conferences do that to you, right? Yeah.
I guess having high expectations and then it goes away.
Yes, high expectations, thinking you should be here. Yeah, back there.
When my routine gets derailed.
Say again?
When my routine gets derailed.
Ah, okay. So you get your groove on, and then what derails it?
Just like circumstances, like again, kind of those like not even high expectations, but you expected something to go a certain way, and then some sort of outside factor, like influences that were like your morning gets like, you wake up late or something like, along those lines.
Okay. Yeah, one more. Yes, other people getting in your way, right? So how many of these could we label? If we wanted to spend an hour, we could, hundreds of them, right? So I look at these as what I call the flow liabilities. And this is kind of like, for those of you studying organizational design or behavior, when you do a force field analysis in an organization, what are the forces that are pushing back on you versus those that are pushing you forward and supporting you? All right, so let's do the opposite for a minute. Let's close your eyes and think of a time where you were highly engaged and focused in what you were doing. You were in that space where who you were and what you were doing kind of molded into one. You felt you had all of the knowledge and skill you needed to do the job. Time flew by. You were intrinsically motivated. You would do it for free. It was a natural extension of who you are. How many of you have had a moment like that, even just for a few seconds? All right. So what I wanted to do is grab a neighbor, and I want to have you be a bit of a social scientist for a minute. Where did the moment like that happen? And what do you think were the factors that contributed to that moment? Okay? So do it in pairs, and just do 1 minute each side. We'll take this 2.5 minutes max, and let's crowdsource a little bit of what are the factors that contribute to great moments. Because we're going to talk about leadership through the foundation of great moments. We'll take 2 minutes. Go for it. We got lots of content to cover. So what I'd love to do, how many of you felt like that's a really good conversation to have with somebody? It's amazing when you give your attention to those kind of moments, what it can do to help you see differently. So how many of you, somebody say, what I like to do is say, where did it happen, and what do you think were the 1 or 2 factors that made the biggest difference to that experience? Yeah. Okay, so enough stress. We're bringing I could tell a whole bunch of stories about optimizing stress. Because some people have too little, some people have too much, right? It's like, anybody know how to drive a stick? Right? It's 7,000 RPM. It's not 8, it's not 4, it's 7. All right, great. Yeah, I love it. That's a powerful thing. The human context, relational context is a big thing, right? So again, we could talk about all these factors all day long. So this has been my quest to map out and study and talk to people about what are the places, what are the factors. So I'm going to give you a crash course in 25 years of research. So if you've been on a roller coaster like this and you're ready to go down, where for like 8 or 9 minutes, just kind of like hold onto your hat, and I will happily talk with you after about more below the waterline of the iceberg. But I wanted to give you kind of a picture of what this is, because this is about 70 years of research. And so here's the gentleman who originally started this idea. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, probably one of the top 3 most famous psychologists in the world. Just passed away a few years ago. He was gracious enough to be my doctoral advisor and to help me. He's a big theorist at the University of Chicago for 30 years and then at Claremont. But he said, I'm interested in your dissertation because we don't really know how to apply this stuff as much as we'd like to. And that was my goal. Theories are great, models are great, tools are great. But if I can't move my fingers and toes and my lips and do something with it, so what? It's just an intellectual exercise. So I want to operationalize flow. And Csikszentmihalyi, there's a lot of ways to define flow, but he said it this way. Flow is being completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away, time flies, every action, movement and thought flows inevitably from the previous one like playing jazz. How many of you would rather be in flow more often than less, right? I think when we lead ourselves and lead other people, we're leading them to their best stuff. We're leading them in a direction towards what they have to offer. So flow is everywhere. This has been around. The research is 70 years old. From athletes to bullfighters to Christie's auctions, I've got hundreds of stories of the crazy places. One of my favorites is the Bozuku Run, the Japanese motorcycle gangs who get into the zone by going together and like breaking stuff and doing all types of really like nefarious activities on motorcycles, but it's kind of a sport for them, not violent, but they do crazy things. And then of course, I had a professor who said she got into flow when she went into the forest to find wild mushrooms because it was so inherently challenging to look for the right conditions to pick these certain type of mushrooms. And you start realizing that every context in the world can be something where you can find your flow. And I thought, if they can make curling an Olympic event, any job you ever do can be an Olympic event if you know how to construct that environment. And this is my favorite. You ever seen extreme ironing contests? They do this. People go all over the world to iron in weird places, and they compete with how, so anything in the world can find your zone of high functioning. So if you ever get bored, I'm going to talk to you about how do you find your flow in that space. So all of these flow environments, wherever you've experienced them, they leave behind clues. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of a structure of how this works. So if you look at all the literature and read all the books, you'll find flow as something like this. It's like, yeah, people tend to find flow when they have clear goals and objectives. That makes sense. When there's unambiguous feedback loops, so you're getting feedback all the time. Self-consciousness goes away because what you are doing, your ego falls away, which is important. A sense of self-control. You feel like you can own the moment. Time starts to distort, whether it's really, really fast on a great date or anybody been in a bad accident, time slows down. Your brain is adjusting to the constructs of the moment. I've been hit 40 miles an hour on the knees, did a flip, and it took like 6 minutes to land on my back and my head on the pavement. Powerful. Intrinsic motive, I just mentioned that. You love it for its own sake. Your attention, of course, is being centered. Your actions and awareness are coming together, and matching your skills and your challenge. Something like this. When your skills are high and your challenges are high, flow is in that upper right-hand corner. And around this, you'll see things like, yeah, I'm aroused here, anxiety here, I'm getting worried, I'm apathetic, boredom, relaxation. You'll see all these different combinations of skills and challenges. Flow tends to be up here. There's a lot of theoretical stuff. I want to bypass that because I want to do the fun stuff. But my quest was, there's got to be a lot more than 9 parts to the human being. So what are all those different activities? And is there a formula for finding that flow? And so my quest was, how do people discover that? And I have many conversations with, how do you find, there's a book Csikszentmihalyi wrote called Finding Flow. I said, it's missing a critical word, the word your. How do you find your flow now, given your circumstances, your issues, your problems, where you want to go. Never a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a personalized formula. So here's a little bit of a structure, and then I want to get into how we stand on the shoulders of flow to discover what makes you great. But if it's one thing I've tried to do is to deconstruct the idea of moments and performance moments and realize that whenever you're performing in something, there's the thing you're doing, there's the technical side of it, whether I'm an accountant or a surgeon or a fighter pilot, and then there's all the human factors. And I do a lot of training with like nuclear scientists and the space program and engineers and chief executives. And they all recognize, and I ask, how many of you have high IQs? They all, yes, high IQs. How many of you have a lot of knowledge? Yes, a lot of knowledge. How many of you know people who have high IQs and high knowledge, but who they are gets in the way of what they know? We all know the really bright person who can't manage themselves out of a box. They can't work with people or build relationships. They don't know how to work in a social system. So I wanted you to remember this, that what you know, always increase your knowledge. But realize that who you're becoming is what pulls up your knowledge. And when you become less, it takes everything down with it. So together, what you know and who you are, the quantitative and the qualitative, together produce that X factor. And it's going to hint at a video. So I started deconstructing it. Like, all of these skills are either on the inside or over time or on the outside. So I could go into it. I had a whole bunch of slides on deconstructing all this. But my research kind of built it up like this. 15 major dimensions where the bulk of these skills show up. And I wanted to ask you a few questions and share with you and have you ponder this to do a little bit of a self-audit on what's working and not working. So the first part is the future orientation. So think about your life and experiences right now. How many of you feel like you have a clear mission, a clear vision, or know the legacy you want to leave behind? All right? Now, have you backed into that? Have you set the structure of goals and built out the plans and maximizing your hour-by-hour time where you have a clear line of sight between where you are today and where you want to be on your deathbed? When you lack all those things, it produces noise in your system. But if you've got a clear line of sight, then it allows you to eliminate that noise and the distraction, and it allows you to start focusing on, all right, I'm clear on where I want to go. So do you have a clear line of sight between now and the end game? Number two, inside of yourself, I break it down into 5 buckets: spiritual, philosophical, psychological, emotional, and physical. So think about spiritual, not through the lens of religion so much as principles and laws that are true. Are they governing our values and our beliefs? Do those govern what we think, how we feel, and how we act? Sometimes we value something and we violate our own values, and what is going on? It's distracting. So there's all these different ways to be distracted by the body. You all mentioned it. Lack of sleep, lack of food, can't control my emotions, don't know how to, I get triggered over things, negative self-talk, overconfidence, underconfidence. I don't know what my values are. What do I believe? Am I aligning to principles that are true? But when you start finding that alignment, you start eliminating the noise inside, and that contributes to focus. So are you aligned internally from the top down? Are you integrated on who you are as a performer? Next, the external world, you all brought it up, and I love the fact that you did, is your immediate physical environment. Do you have the right stuff, the right tools? Are you in optimal spaces to do great work? Are you controlling what you can control? Moving, whether it's a surgical table or your dorm room or where you work. And then the people that surround you, the relationships that surround you, are they assets to you or liabilities? What about the groups or teams that you're in? Are they assets or liabilities? What about the organizations that you're in, your institutions? Are they your assets or liabilities? The communities that you live in. All of those social and physical places either help or hinder. and you need to pay attention to what it's doing for you. So are you optimally aligned to the physical and social environments that surround you? These are all just questions to do what I call personal strategic planning. And then lastly, what about your past? How many of you feel like in the short past you're getting all the feedback loops you need to adjust, that you're analyzing what's working, what's not working, that you're able to spend time internalizing those lessons? And then in the long past, how many of you know how to access your greatest successes from, I like to do this in class, your 100 greatest successes from kindergarten to yesterday. Where did they happen? Tell the story. It's amazing how much self-confidence you gain. I put that out as a challenge for anybody. And then do the same for your greatest failures and how much have you learned so that your failures don't haunt you in the moment. Unprocessed failure comes back in the moment. And then challenging your assumptions. Do you challenge your historical assumptions constantly to readjust? And if you start doing all that stuff, it all contributes to focus. And theoretically, if you remove all that interference, you have clear line of sight, internally aligned, externally aligned, historically aligned, that gives you this. Well, then what's the fifth alignment? The fifth alignment is the game you're playing. So when you're working, when you're striking a tennis ball, when you're doing a brain surgery, when you're teaching a class, when you're selling something, that you're focused on the game and nothing's getting in your way. So I have a bunch of tools I can offer you after this. We can talk about that. But I wanted to give you a feel for just how much that there's two games in life to always play. I always did this to my students. What's the one technical next skill you need to learn? And then number two, what's the one personal or leadership skill you need? Because together, that will be your greatest accelerant to growing and performing in your world. So is there anything getting in the way that right now, getting in the way of your focus so that you can be at your best? Now, I call this attentional leadership because there's so many definitions of leadership. I've always thought, leadership at its core is just influence. But what do we influence? We influence ourselves. Do we influence what we eat, what we think, what we feel? Yes, of course. Do we influence other people? I've met so many students around the country who say, I don't think I'm a leader. Well, do you influence anything? Oh, yeah, I influence stuff. Well, then you're leading stuff. But at the core of influence is where your attention is. Think about that. The rarest commodity on earth today isn't something in your cell phone from China, isn't some rare mineral. It's sustained attention on important factors. And sustained attention is hard because everything and everybody and all technology wants your attention. So your capacity to sustain attention on the most important things is one of the greatest gifts you'll ever give yourself. So to me, there's 3 secrets to this. And I know we've got about 10 minutes, about 5 minutes. I have a ton of video clips, so I might save those for this afternoon. I want to show at least one of them. Secret number 1 is always identify the one thing. I said this to all my clients, whether I'm working at the organizational level, the team level, or the individual level. There's 100 things we could all do to improve. Only about 3 of them is 90% of the value. How do you get to the 1, 2, or 3 things that you're going to do differently? Everything else is a distraction. And so we do what I call flow asset and liability review. We've got a full assessment for that. And your personal formula, here's your flow formula. What are your internal assets plus your external assets divided by your internal liabilities and your external liabilities? Very simple formula, but it's the one that you have to discover. It's very personal. It looks something like this when you do the assessment. So do you right now know what your formula is? And if you don't, you should go find it. But you probably have hunches about it. So I have a short version of that. Secret number 2, failing faster and better through iteration. This is the universal secret for all success, period. I've studied it over and over again. It's, can I put the one thing that I got to improve at the center of my attention? Define what investments I'm going to make in trying to do something about it. What's my process for experimentation? How do I observe what's happening? And what feedback loop tells me if I'm doing it right or wrong? And my willingness to spin around that circle until I've nailed the thing I'm trying to master. And so I will show you this particular video. It's called The Rage to Master, but I want to show you this second part. This is a great depiction of people who have a rage to master.
Roger Federer warming up for the US Open one time, right? This is a guy who doesn't really need to practice his basic strokes anymore. And yet, while most of the people were sort of simulating games while they're warming up, here he is. He sets up like a ball boy across the court and has the ball boy hold his hand like this and starts trying to just hit the ball into the ball boy's hand without having him move it. And it's going a little bit up and a little bit side, and sits there for like an hour doing this until to be able to obsess on that little thing, to almost to have fun with that and a compulsion to have it. I think the vast majority of great athletes have that to some degree, whether it's Jerry Rice trying to cut that route again just perfectly, or obsessing on that little bitty thing that other people would say, well, I've got it good enough and move on. I think that's pretty unique, and I think that's almost essential. The epitome of this is when Tony Hawk pulled the first 900.
Tony Hawk, some of his speed right here. He's on a roll right now, full of confidence. Let's see what he's got. He's the 900.
He's on ESPN2 doing the X Games, and he's missing it. He's not rotating enough, and he keeps missing and falling, and the clock for his time runs out. And he just keeps walking his board up there and getting a little closer, just a little more revolution. It's like 8 minutes after the competition is over. The competition is over, and he's just walking back up, and then he over-rotates it a little, and he under-rotates it a little, and he keeps coming back. After his time has expired, he nails it, and everyone goes crazy. He could not walk away without just honing that into the exact right angle.
All right, so that second secret is the capacity to master the one thing that would make you better. And then I'm going to cut to the chase on the rest of this, because I have a bunch of case studies. And the key point that I wanted to show you is that in all these cases, whether you study elite performers in any field, they all come not with pure talent. They come with inherent weaknesses and strengths. And in all these case studies, you find that it was through their weaknesses that they had to invent a new approach to doing something which made them the very best in the world at what they did. We make these assumptions about those who have it and those who don't have it. But it's those folks who know how to discover that unique combination of what I'm good at, how I'm good at. One of the videos in here shows a boxer who had short arms and was short. And it was because he learned to go underneath, he reinvented the nature of boxing and was one of the greatest heavyweight boxers in the world. Another gentleman in here from Brazil who had 2 knees that bowed out. He wasn't even supposed to walk. But his ability to work with that made him one of the best soccer players in the world. So I know that we all come and think, well, do I have the gifts or talents or to make it? And the fact is, everybody has this unique combination of strengths and weaknesses, and it's how you assemble those together which makes all the difference in the world. And for those of you who want to come this afternoon, I want to talk a little bit about Charlie, is like this pink video. She really talks about the demons and the weaknesses of her early childhood, and all of it was required for her to discover her signature brand. And it's very, very powerful to see these stories and to realize, wow, you know, we all come with this early stuff, and it is all part of the unfolding and equation of things. And so discovering what makes you great is that thing. Now, the third secret is scaling it out. Think about that. If you can do this work for yourself, what if you could help other people follow that same thing? What if you could do that with your friends and family? What if you could do that with a colleague? What if you could do that in a team? What if you could do that in an organization? That every principle of leadership on the inside translates to every layer on the outside. Your influence can scale. I've got lots of examples, friends of mine I've done trips around the world with, the first blind man to summit Everest, couldn't have done it without Jeff. It was because of their unique strengths and weaknesses that got them up Everest. And my friend who was a gold medal winner, he didn't win because he was the best rower. He told me he won and got on the Olympic boat because he studied how to motivate everybody else in the boat. And it was by thinking of other people that he elevated the whole boat, and hence he made the Olympic team. Very, very powerful paradigms. So with that, I'll just leave this message. I think this a bit of a biology lesson. But think about it for a second. The first race you ever run. The first race you ever ran was a 200 million to 1 shot. That's really something profound. It's half our country's size. And that first race you won, nobody has your genes, nobody has your iris, nobody has your fingerprint, nobody has your personal history, your cultural history, your unique experiences. All of this comes uniquely through you. And when you think about all of your ancestors that have come together in that cesspool of genes that now resides in you, and now this is the stage, who you are right now, is the only you that's ever going to be. And to challenge you a bit to realize that, how do you go discover that? So I've added to Twain's quote. I said, there's really 3 great days of your life. One is the day you were born. The second is to know why. The third is to know how you're going to deliver on what your purpose is. And so to be the hero of your own story and to be able to find that journey. And our partnership with ODK and Mark Quest with Charlie Academy, we'll talk about it this afternoon, is to help students and those who are running programs have all the content and principles necessary to help build the who side of the equation, from mastering self to interpersonal skills to teaming skills. And we're doing that in a way where we're trying to understand what universities and programs need. So I hope you come this afternoon to that program. We'll talk a little bit more. If we have extra time, I'll show you some of these really interesting video clips. But we're excited because ODK has come from a very deep history of its values and what it's trying to accomplish. And we've been talking for years about what are the skills and what are the resources we could bring to help you discover your greatest self and do great things in the world. So with that, it's a pleasure to be with you. I will be hanging around. So will Tony. Tony's a partner of ours in supporting this work. And please talk to me and have a fantastic rest of your conference.